Hi, everybody. My name is Sophie Alcorn, and I will be guiding you through immigration options for people who want to work in the space sector. At my practice, Alcorn Immigration Law in Silicon Valley, we're seeing lots of immigrants who are excited to be able to create space tech startups. And I just know lots of people, lots of engineers and people in my professional networks who would really love to work for a space company because it's so cool. But they're on a visa or they're an international student and they're trying to figure out how to unpack this like chicken and egg thing of staying in the US and being able to follow their passion from a professional perspective. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. By way of background, I write for TechCrunch, the Ask Sophie column that appears on Wednesdays, and I'm the author of Ask Sophie, the Founder's Guide to Visas and Green Cards, which is my book, which is available on Amazon, on Kindle, and by print. And as a mom, I just think we should live in a world where every child has the chance to live their dreams, regardless of the circumstances of their birth. So if we can all do what we're passionate about, it'll help ourselves, each other, the economy, planet, humans becoming a multi-planetary species. So I've been really enjoying, Bryce, chatting with you about all of those ideas, and I'm excited to share some nuts and bolts practicality today. And then just so you know, Bryce is amazing. He's the president of the Association for Commercial Space Professionals. He's based in Albuquerque. He too comes from a legal background as a space lawyer. Lover of space policy, and his mission is to help integrate the private and government sectors to create a dynamic and innovative field for the safety and benefit of future generations. So, Bryce, I would love to make this a little bit conversational as I go through all the slides, but what would your vision be for the future of humanity if and when ACSP has been able to fulfill its mission to the communities it supports?
Total domination by ACSP.
Yes.
Wait, real quick. You said meditation and mom. You're meditating?
Yeah, I'm a meditator. It
We
says it on the slide, so I must.
Yeah, I know. That's why I saw that. I was like, this is. I quit law for a while when I was in New York and went hardcore into meditation for multiple years, and now is the basis of. That's why I found space. That's why I think space. I always talk to people about space as being one of the few areas that really blends the altruistic and basically the spiritual and the material quite well. It's one of, and that's why I love space, because it really is the amalgamation of both things. Like anyone you meet that wants to, for the most part, anyone that I meet that wants to get into the space industry has this wonder and awe, and like you can't, for the most part, get into the space industry without that. Other industries, yes,
you kind of have to be a dreamer. I think,
you
right?
Have to. Like, because space is hard. This is hard.
It doesn't make any practical sense for like.
It makes no practical sense. Yeah.
A 3D material reality.
Exactly. So my dream really is I would like to see. I think a lot of people misunderstand that you have to pick Earth or space. I think once we become that interplanetary species, when we have the critical mass in space, that it'll kind of shift. I think it's an evolutionary step for humanity. And it's one that is so important that once we really start leveraging space, it is going to benefit Earth faster than if we just focused on Earth.
Yeah, so I know some people who are like, I'm all in on Earth. We got to solve climate, like forget space. And then other people that are like, the Earth is screwed. Let's just do space so that we survive. But I think it's actually like both make both better.
I agree. Because the resources that and the breadth of knowledge and intelligence and leap in execution of technology to get to space, you don't necessarily need on Earth, but by pushing the boundaries of what humans are capable of, we'll actually be able to expedite, I believe, the solving of the problems that will then directly impact Earth. So that's my hope is we start to see more and more of that, more and more people understanding that synergy.
Oh my God, amazing. Well, I'm so excited, and I guess I'm surprised that we have that in common, but also not surprised because a lot
I
of
know.
people, right? It's just funny. Okay. So, well, that's amazing. Let's all help humanity. And right, and then when you like zoom out at this level, you're like, okay, what borders? You know, so like if you're on one part of the dot and you need to go to another, like how do we just help make that?
Exactly.
That's what we'll talk about today. And I see that some people are starting to put their questions in the Q&A panel. So that's awesome. Thank you so much. And yeah, and some of these we will be, so, you know, I can talk for days about immigration law, and that's not the point of this today. In the deck, what I'll be giving everybody is just some like high level legal pointers and then directions for next steps. And then depending on the questions we get, you know, we're happy to reserve a lot of this for Q&A and discussion. So keep the questions coming. Okay, so then moving forward, just some tidbits and some background for you. Companies in the space industry, and I'm going to read the slides too, because some people are just going to be listening in and not looking at this. Companies in the space industry grew revenue to $427.6 billion in 2022, up from basically, you know, 396 billion the year before. So the space industry is rapidly growing. I don't know if there are 2023 numbers yet, but it's huge and there's lots of opportunities. And because the financial incentives are there, you know, if you think about like mining a meteor or something, how much or astro, I'm probably not getting the scientific terminology correct. I haven't done astronomy since I was 13, but anyway, the mineral riches in space, the potential to build things in space exploration. There's so many aspects of these industries which can have commercial aspects. So the financial incentives are absolutely there. And then it also draws, as you said, on this aspect of us that, you know, dreams and wants to see distant horizons and to imagine, you know, a new way of being in the universe. And then this overlaps with these immigration trends because the US is and remains to be at its very core a nation of immigrants. So if we, and these are some of the figures from my book that I used in the Ask Sophie book that I just published about going into these options in a lot of depth, but we see these continual cross-country migration corridors. So the US, you know, continues to be the main destination country for all immigrants of the world. And it draws a lot of people from Canada, China, India, the United Kingdom, France, and Germany, but really all countries. And the number of immigrants in the US continues to rise. And over the last decade, with the rise of social media and online communities and just like people being able to help each other and like, you know, wiki type websites and Discord and all of that, I think that the availability of business immigration pathways and knowledge and education around them is definitely growing as well. So I think when we're speaking about immigration, the landscape for business immigration has significantly changed as well over the last several years, with more and more people understanding that they have the opportunity to use our existing laws and legal statuses to kind of like take charge of their own destiny and harness their own immigration status and get a green card for themselves. And no longer is it like, well, you know, I don't want to do online dating to find an American, and I don't know if my company's going to sponsor me, so I guess I'll go back to my home country. I see more and more that people want to take their personal destiny into their own hands and create their own opportunities to follow the career that they are passionate about or the company they want to build. And so Bryce, tell us what you see in the world of space technology professionals. You know, what types of people are becoming attracted to working in the sector?
Yeah, I'm amazed at the level of students. There's just a wave of students coming, and engineers, attorney, everywhere. That's the funny thing is like we have, since I'm an attorney and we deal a lot, that's kind of my network. We see a bunch of attorneys, students, and career attorneys that already built in. They're looking on how to pivot on the best ways to do that. We have a lot of international students that are studying at universities currently to get into space law. What we're seeing though, again, is that they don't understand their options. They're hoping for a Hail Mary that they get into one of these organizations that will be able to sponsor them. But for the people that can't, they have to return, and it's really sad. And I'm hearing more and more stories of that. I did a adjunct professorship at an engineering school here in New Mexico this year for space law and policy, which was really cool. And a few of those students were foreign and brilliant. I mean, brilliant. But because of that background, they're excluded from a lot of the work that their peers are doing, and a lot of potentiality for future jobs. And they're asking, they're like, what are my options? Like, and it's a shame that I get it from a national security standpoint, sure, but at the same time, like these are, when we're starting to turn away talent based on nationality, if we really want to build space commerce to the next level and open that up, I think we're missing the boat on a lot of things. So from my end, we're actually even doing a talk after there's a huge symposium called Space Symposium. On the heels of that with KPMG, and they're now starting to scratch the surface for their companies and biz dev and whatnot on what do companies that are space adjacent, so not launch, satellite, ISAM, that type of thing. What does it look like? Because there was this great paper that came out a while ago that Harvard Business Review wrote that said, essentially, if you're not thinking about your position in space, you will essentially miss the boat. Just like people who kind of poo-pooed the internet, it's very similar to what, if you're not finding your place in space, then you're going to miss a huge opportunity. So that's what I'm seeing right now in the current market.
Whoa, that's crazy. That actually was one of the things that got me started in this whole thing of like space immigration about 2 years ago. I went to like a demo day of NASA Ames Research Center, and they had a booth. And Alex, maybe you can help us find the podcast and put it into the link for everybody. But the Space Court Foundation was like lawyers thinking about how to have justice on Mars, or what do you do if there's a crime on the moon?
Sure.
So absolutely, we can extend what we do here to there, and it's very, very different. I've been thinking a lot about like space visas and how do we ensure democratic access to leave the planet and go other places. And one of the interesting things is the whole framework is completely different. It's not considered immigration if you go from the United States to the moon and back to the United States. And so there's just different legal concepts that govern the flow of humans through space and back to Earth, and then also goods and property in space, which is very fascinating. So
yeah.
But we need legal change also. One of the things we'll talk about a little bit is like, if you're an immigrant founder in the US and you want to commercialize your own space technology, at some point when you leave your university research arena, it might actually become, depending on the technology you're building, it might be illegal for you to build your own technology in a private commercial environment in the United States. And so that's like a problem with our legal structures, and it's really counter to what you know, the government and the administration has said is important for our national interest of welcoming new space technology builders in the United States. So yes, legal reform needed. And yeah, I think this sector draws on people from all backgrounds, which is very, very, very exciting.
Yeah, I don't see, people might not understand their place yet, but the more and more I'm, you know, there's such a great quote or such a great story of JFK walking the Apollo. I forget exactly what it was. I think it was when they first started, and at NASA, and he again, who knows if it's true? It might just be lore. But he walked up to a janitor and said, "What do you do here at NASA?" And he goes, "I'm helping put a man on the moon." And it's like, once everyone realizes their place in space, I think it's going to really open up a broader context as opposed to just the kind of the jobs that we're seeing right now. So everyone understands that they belong.
Yeah, yeah, wonderful. Okay, so then to go into that a little more deeply, some of the context is, you know, if immigrants want to go into space tech, in general, immigration is intense. And if you want to be in space, it's a little bit more intense because of all of the compliance requirements, which we'll talk about a little bit. But there are restrictions that bar international individuals from working on space technology. And so what a lot of people find is that it's very difficult to get a job at a space company unless they have a green card, or they received asylum, or they're a refugee, or they've become a US citizen. But for most international students and other professionals, that entry point really becomes getting a green card. And that's because of a variety of different rules and regulations. I got to learn about this from attorney Bailey Reichel, who's an amazing space technology lawyer. And so we have oh, Alex just put the link in the chat window to this podcast I did with Bailey recently, number 162. And she really goes into the details of all of this. But, you know, it's like you have to ask yourself, what am I building? Which organizations governs it? Is the Department of State, Department of Commerce, BIS? You know, what is the relevant law? Is it ITAR, EAR? Do I need an export control license? Is the State Department getting involved? What am I building? Does it have a military application? Otherwise, is it a deemed export? It's a very complicated legal analysis. It's not immigration law, and it's outside of my area of expertise, but I think Bailey did a really good job of explaining some of the basics on the podcast. The essential thing is that if you're not considered a US person, then, and if you're working on one of these technologies that is controlled in some way, then, well, if you want to work on a controlled technology, or control technology that might be controlled, you have to figure out what controls is this technology subject to, and then is it possible for me to get an export control license or some sort of other permission to be legally able to build this technology. And so it's really nuanced. And when you're in like a university research context, and you're doing fundamental research, a lot of this stuff is allowed, like in a campus research lab. But then if you've hit on something that you want to commercialize and you want to create a startup and raise funding, and go out and build this thing, there's kind of this like gray area of, you know, I can't get customers because we have to go through due diligence process to show that we meet all of these requirements, and I don't want to jeopardize my visa, so I have to make sure I meet these requirements. But it's expensive and confusing to meet the requirements, and I don't have money yet because I haven't been able to get sales. So if you really want to try to build without a green card, definitely listen to that podcast with Bailey first. I think it's a really great stepping stone. And then also, Bryce, this is what you are doing in a couple months in New Mexico. Could you share a little bit about your boot camp?
Yeah, so Bailey is a co-founder of ACSP as well. We and one of the board members of ACSP. So she has a lot of incredible input into our programming. And one of the things that we started was a space regulatory boot camp. And people think that this might be too technical or it's only for lawyers. And really what it is it's for everyone, where we pretty much teach with subject matter experts from around the US and now the world. Actually, we have someone coming from International Telecommunications Union, which we're pretty pumped about. Basically, understanding export controls, how it affects you and your company, your potential company. We recommend everyone that is, international or not to come to something like this. Understanding the third day or second day is telecoms. So we'll handle a lot about licensing. We'll talk about just the whole breadth of that, because a lot of companies and people don't understand the timelines it takes to, say, get an FCC license. It could be 2 years, it could be $250,000, and so they don't build that into their business plan, and they run into a lot of issues. And then the third day is government contracts.
Like if you've been studying startups and you're like, oh, I want to do one in space, I think it's more accurate to think about it like the biotech space rather than the software space, where there's a lot of compliance requirements. Things take a lot of money to build hardware. There's a lot of regulatory processes and it takes time. And so it's a really different business plan than like, oh, I have a pitch deck, I'm going to build an enterprise SaaS, we're going to raise 2 million with our generative AI application. It's just a different world. So if you're like looking at space tech from that perspective, it's
Amen. That actually is a really good. We need a whole other podcast on that, because that's a really good
let's
point.
do that.
And I don't think a lot of people, that's such a. I knew the comparison, but I've been looking for that type of that wording. So that's great. We anyway, let's pigeonhole that. Let's
okay, we'll make a note of that. Yeah,
because that's a good, because you're right. A lot of people enter this thinking it's just a typical startup with a deck, and it's like no, you get to think from the regulatory aspect, and most people don't. And then we go into government contracting. So it's going to be a really interesting 4 days. And we actually have Michelle Hanlon coming in the beginning. She's teaching something really interesting of how to use the outer space treaties and the various treaties to benefit your business argument when you're going up against the different agencies, which I haven't actually heard that conversation before. So that's our boot camp.
That's amazing. And, I think this relates to one of the questions. I'm monitoring our Q&A panels so that we can make sure to get through all the questions. But here's one that kind of relates as we're diving into this. Somebody asks, they're Canadian, they have a US space startup. They want to bid on NASA grants without having to subcontract because of their citizenship status, because only green card holders and US citizens are eligible for government funding. And so they're asking, what can they do to enable themselves to become eligible without buying $1 million of property in the US? So I'll talk about how to get a green card. That's going to be what we're going to dive into next. But barring that, Bryce, are you familiar at a high level of like, if there's a US company with foreign owners and the US company wants to get government funding for like SBIR or NASA or like other federal grants, is there a way for those companies to qualify for federal funding? Is there any blanket rule, like it has to be a US company with US owners, or does it just depend on the agency?
It normally has to, and I'm sorry if you hear a baby crying. We have
Zoom does a great job, actually.
Yeah,
so,
good. Yes, this actually be a great conversation for Bailey and the team. But the one thing for most CBIR, that has to be, I think, 51% ownership of US. And so what some companies do is they set up a company in the US. They license their IP to the US company, and they have a CEO that is a US citizen. And so basically, essentially, they create that company that works specifically on that with the 51% ownership to the US person, licensing that tech over here. There's a lot of intricacies to that, obviously, especially with once you start sharing the technology back, if the US company starts sharing the technology back to the Canadian firm, then we have you have to have some safeguards so that doesn't create an export. So yeah, that's
complicated.
The most predominant thing that I've seen is they set that up where they essentially have an entity that is US owned, US person as the head of that, 51% ownership, licensed. Now, that doesn't mean that, you know, the larger entity can still control that or still have sway over that.
Yeah.
You set up enough contracts and essentially documents that ensure that this can't take the IP, this entity can't take the IP, this entity can't run away with the profits, that type of thing. So you set up a whole legal ecosystem and framework for that. But that's the one I've seen. I know Bailey and her team, they work predominantly on issues on this. But that might be a better question. We can point you to Aegis.law. They work with this a lot.
Oh yeah, I'll put that in the chat window. That's Bailey's law firm. Yeah, and then Bryce, we have so many topics that we're gonna talk about when we do a podcast, so that'll be exciting.
Yeah, this is good.
And I'm gonna try to go to this boot camp, so in case people want to go there and chat about immigration and make those plans, we can do that. But if you need help sooner, you're also welcome to reach out to us. But I think that question is a great segue, because really when people talk about like, oh, I don't want to buy $1 million of stuff in the US to qualify for something, they're really referring to the EB-5 investor green card program, which is one path to permanent residence, but it's not the only path. So I think that's the perfect segue to go into this next question, which is, so here's where we're at. It's like, okay, great. I want to work in space technology. I'm an immigrant. I want to live in the US. Maybe I can get a job that will do the export control license for me, and there's something I can work on. If you're able to do that, it's a little easier, it seems, to go work at other companies once you've been through that process. But if it's like, no, I just need the green card to be in the clear and not have to deal with this, how do you get a green card? And for a lot of people going through the corporate immigration process, it's sort of like what Bryce alluded to, of like having a US person in charge. And with contracts and good lawyers, you can set things up securely. But I know a lot of immigrants over the years have, asked their friends or employers to do them like a favor by sponsoring them legitimately through their businesses, for example. But it creates this like emotional dependency, and it, convolutes your relationship with that person. And getting a green card is a multi-year process. So, it's very important to be deliberate, and that's why I'm going to be sharing with you a couple of green cards that you can actually self-petition, where you don't need to get married to an American, and you don't need an employer to sponsor you, and you don't need a lottery to get it randomly, and you don't need to put in $1 million. So that's what I'll share for a few minutes, and then we'll go to questions. And to put this into context, if you need to start working immediately in the United States, a green card is not your best option. You're going to need a work visa. So that's typically like an H-1B in the lottery in March, or an O-1A for extraordinary ability, or an L-1 because you transferred from the foreign branch of your company to the US branch, or an E-2 investor visa. So all of those can take like 3 to 12 months to put into place once you're qualified. But the green card is the thing you'll actually need, because if you have an O-1 or an H-1B and you want to work on some controlled technology, you would need an export control license before you can start working. So that's why many people, especially who want to be founders and have their own companies, might want to get a green card first. So this is like all the pieces, but putting it together is always a super personalized action plan based on the really detailed nuances of your own immigration situation, of where you are now and where you want to be, and like what other priorities you're trying to meet along the way. If you need to travel a bunch internationally, if you never want to leave the US, how you're going to make money, if other family members are involved, what you want to work on and on what timeline, your business plan. So very, very many factors that make this an individualized process. So in general, when you get a green card through an employment-based pathway with a US company, that's like the standard default. It's 3 steps. Step 1 is perm. Step 2 is your I-140, and step 3 is your I-485, your green card application. You do the I-485 if you're already in the US, like as a student or a worker on a work visa. You can get green cards when you're outside of the US, but it's taking longer with the State Department. So like if you're in Canada getting a green card, it might take, I don't know, 3 years. But if you're in the US and you're a Canadian and you're on a work visa and you're getting a green card, it could take 1.5 years. So there's definitely a time incentive to figure out some visa first to get in the US and working and start the green card process from there. So if you want to be a founder, or if you want to run your own business, like a services business or something, law firm, we can't do the perm process for you because that's where the US company is trying to test the labor market and trying to replace you with other qualified Americans to do your job instead of you. And only if they can't find anybody, then they're allowed to jump to step 2. So we can't do that if you're a majority owner of your company. So we look at options that only involve step 2 and step 3, thus saving 1 year and making it possible to self-petition. And when you hear EB1, EB2, EB3, those are all the employment-based. EB is employment-based preference categories. Congress created the law in the 60s. There's 5 categories, EB1 through 5. They give out the green cards to the EB1 people first every year, certain amounts to people, and no more than a certain number per country of birth. And then they give out the green cards to the EB2 people, and there's a new allotment for the EB3 people, et cetera, et cetera. There's a whole flow of like extra green cards flow to the next category if they're not used up. So if you can get an EB1, that's the fastest category because it's the highest preference, and it always resets every year with new green cards first. And that matters, especially if you're born in India and China, because we have backlogs that are significantly longer for people from those countries rather than other countries. So if you're going to self-petition, you're probably going to start with step 2. You're simply going to do your own EB1 or EB2 I-140 petition. And then once your priority date, your spot in line is current on the visa bulletin, as soon as that's available, you're going to be filing your I-485 adjustment of status application. With that, you'll be filing for a work permit, which usually comes in about 2 months right now from when you file. And then there may be a time when you're when you need to stay in the United States for several months, depending on your underlying visa status. But once you get advance parole, that's a travel permission document to allow you to travel while you're waiting for your green card. So a lot in there. So the stuff I like the most for space professionals to optimize for speed and self-petitioning as the priorities. EB1A, like if you can get it, it's the best. EB2 NIW is also great, but because of slight backlogs now, probably even for like somebody from Europe or Japan or Australia, there's still going to probably be like an additional 9 months of delay right now. So like if you can get EB1, you could save 9 months. EB1 actually has 3 subcategories: EB1A, EB1B, and EB1C. EB1A is extraordinary ability. Are you at the top of your field or subfield in a country or in the world? A company can get that for you, or you can self-petition. EB1B, outstanding researchers and other professionals, like professors, that requires an employer sponsorship, but it's just as fast. So if you're working in a research team at a private company, or if you're going to be a professor at a university, they can fast track you into the EB1 category for your green card into the EB1B. But since it's not a self-petition, the green card is based on a permanent offer of employment to you. So not only should you continue working for that organization during the duration of the green card process, but you should also plan to work for that organization for like at least 1 year or 2 after your green card is approved. So many people prefer to self-petition so they don't have that obligation. There's another category in the EB1, but it's less common for space tech, but it is possible. It's the EB1C. and that's for multinational managers and executives. So if you're transferring from the foreign office of a US company to the US headquarters, for example, that would be a use case for that. So EB1A and EB2 NIW are where I will focus further for a few minutes. The EB1A green card, so this is the best, but it's also the hardest. And I keep saying best, and so I just want to like clarify, there are many paths up the mountain, but the top of the mountain is the same view from anywhere, right? So like, I keep saying best, but it's not like you're a morally better person if you can qualify for an EB1A versus an EB3. It's just that it's best because it's faster and always available, and you can self-petition. But like, ultimately, you're going to get a green card. It's permanent residence, whether you marry an American or whether you win the green card lottery or whether you invest $1 million or whether you get an EB1. At the end of the day, at some point, there's going to be a 10-year permanent residence card in your wallet, and it's a lifetime status, and you can keep renewing it. So the end result is the same. It's just which path reaches your goals on the journey to the top of the mountain. So EB1A, fastest, can self-petition. It's like Extraordinary Ability O1s, which is a visa that you could get beforehand, but isn't permanent. The O1 is not permanent residence, so you could still be subject to export controls. And why that is because if you're not a citizen, green card holder, refugee, or asylee, and you want to work in the US on a controlled technology, even if you as a human are on US soil with a work visa, when the technology passes to you, it's like we're exporting the technology from the United States because you're a foreign person. And so that's why a license is required. So even if you keep the data in your office in the United States, it would still be considered an export, and it might be controlled. So that's why export controls are involved to humans in the US, which is kind of it makes sense from a legal perspective, but not from a human perspective. So EB1A is probably going to take you up to 18 months right now. I just have gotten a few approved end-to-end in 6 months, which was kind of insane. But basically, the person had a current priority date. We used premium processing on their I-140. We concurrently filed their I-485s, and they were in some sort of emerging technology in the national interest. So space tech people, all of your stuff is in the national interest. It's helpful. Some of these individuals have been in artificial intelligence, which is also important to the United States right now. So it is possible to get a green card way faster. If you're looking at timing, I would say the critical piece is getting as many steps of this done as possible prior to the November election. We might have an administration change. Immigration procedures and adjudication timelines might change if there's a different administration next year. I think that like both political parties are super on board about America recruiting the world's top talent from a national security and economic development perspective. So I think like you'll be good, but I don't know how the systems will change in general. So it's good to get whatever you can done in 2024, I would say. If you're brainstorming how to qualify for Extraordinary Ability, there are many categories. It's slightly different if you're an artist. I have often worked with many entrepreneurs, so some of these examples are brainstorming what it would look like for a startup founder, for example. But people in research and academia get this all the time. You could potentially get this as a lawyer, but you would have to argue that your work is in a business field because law is not one of the approved fields. So if we can position you as an expert in space business because of your legal background, we would probably want to take some position like that. But there's like 8 to 10 categories, and we can be really flexible as long as we're persuasive about how you qualify. Winning competitions, getting grant funding, that could be considered awards. There's so many advisory roles in startups or committees that are high level that you could join that could be considered a membership into an organization that's like only for esteemed professionals that you could get. Maybe people have written about your work in space magazines or scientific peer-reviewed journals, or even newspapers or business magazines. There's all sorts of technology and other types of competitions you could judge, or you could peer review other people's works. It's very, very flexible, and creating an action plan for this is really based on your field, which, as you can see from what Bryce said, if you're imagining how to take your job and do it in outer space, like even that is such a narrow field, like anything you can do in that would probably be very persuasive. And we do have an online class called Extraordinary Ability Prep, which I will ask Alex to put in the chat window as well, and with a promo code as well, so that you can enroll in that if you want to just do some like preliminary brainstorming on what to do in your field and what would work and what would qualify. I recorded 15 video modules for that class that go into all of the criteria in a lot of detail for O1, EB1A, and EB2 NIW. So speaking of which, the other main green card, EB2 NIW, if you're not subject to the India or China wait times and you're okay with another like 9 months of waiting, I would say that EB2 NIW is a much easier green card to get, like if you're from Canada or Germany or Mexico. It's probably going to take about 2 years overall. And we can do it with as little as a business plan for how you would create a commercial space company in the US once your green card is approved. So it has a very, very different set of standards from the EB1A. The EB1A is backwards looking, like what did I accomplish and why I'm amazing. The EB2 NIW is forward looking, and it's like how I'm going to contribute to the United States national interest in the future once my green card is approved. So just some differences in comparing the two, the EB1A and the EB2 NIW. For the EB1A, you got to show sustained acclaim in your field in the past. It's really the best option if you were born in India or China, and premium processing is faster. The government will make a decision in 15 days. EB2 NIW is easier. You either have to have a master's degree or higher, or we have to show exceptional ability, which is way easier than extraordinary ability. Most of you probably have that part already. And then we need to show that in the future, your business plan or your job opportunities, they have substantial merit, national importance, you're well positioned to do it personally, and that it's in the US's best interest to waive the requirement of recruiting other Americans to replace you. Premium processing is a little bit slower, 45 days, but you still have to go through your I-485 process. So like overall, the timing is just a little bit longer. The biggest thing right now is the slight backlog on the visa bulletin. So I think with that, as we go forward, have a couple more slides, and I know there's questions. Yeah, so maybe I'll leave this up, and oh, and Alex, thank you so much for putting the Alcorn Academy class, and we'll be emailing you a discount code for that as well, everybody who's listening. Okay, lots of questions. So we have about 10 minutes. Bryce, here's one from a lawyer. How do I get involved in the development of policy in space law as a Canadian scientist or researcher? Policy in space law, if you're from Canada and you're a scientist. I guess it's like who develops space policy? Government institution?
That's a good question. Is that, for Canada or for the US?
Yeah, I guess that would be the first question. Like, whose policy do you want to influence? Let's assume America, because this is an immigration.
Let's assume, yeah. If you're focusing on the US, I mean, there's a ton of think tanks that have that influence. That, you know, when I got into this industry, I was really amazed at how heavily the White House relies on think tanks and their papers and their positions to start guiding a lot of their decision making and kind of where they're going. I didn't think it was that influential, but they are.
I'm surprised about that too, as I learn more about think tanks and white papers. It's very
Right.
fascinating. Yeah.
Right. They do rely heavily on that. The other thing that's actually really interesting is creating it yourself. It's kind of the more and more you start to have an opinion, and the more and more you put that opinion out there, it doesn't need to be a peer reviewed. It doesn't have to be a white paper in the beginning. The more you start. Right now, we're in a vacuum where there aren't a ton of voices that are taking a very serious opinion with, and here's the other key component, with an action plan. We have a lot of voices saying that this is bad, this is wrong, we need to fix this, that, the other thing, but very few people take a stance. I noticed this when I was getting an LLM at the time, and everybody was able to point out the problems, but no one really had the guts to say how they would fix it, because that's where all of a sudden you have skin in the game. And if you can, okay, so let's just put if you take the policy side and you don't go with the think tanks and you want to do this kind of ad hoc on your own, that to me would be like, hey, these are the issues and this is how I would tackle it. That gets a lot of attention.
Piggyback on that, Bryce, that sort of like American pull yourself up by the bootstraps, thought leadership, fake it till you make it, sort of personal branding strategy is amazing for immigration, because this Canadian person could probably get an O1 through an agent to be self-employed or have multiple income streams consulting in the US to do this type of work. And then they would be like a thought leader, and they could get an EB2 NIW to self-petition for a green card at the intersection of science and space policy. So I love it. I love your like.
That's awesome. This is great. Cool. Sophie, can we just stay on for another couple hours, because this is the more and more we collaborate. The other thing too is I just want to pitch ACSP is ACSP is going to start building out a committee where we're going to bring in students and people from within the ecosystem that, committees that are going to essentially advocate for policy and
so
start to want to shape it. So
who wants to lead one of those advisory committees, you can use that for your O1 and EB1 for professional.
Oh, this is great. I love it. I love this. Sophie, this is good. This is good stuff.
It's gonna help you recruit. Okay, let's do a few more. This is a third-year PhD student from India on an F1 who wants to be able to work in doing actual research in places like the US Navy, NASA, or the Army. I don't know specifically about the military, but I would say use your PhD time to change your status from an O1 from an F1 to an O1 even before you graduate. Check with your school, but they should allow you to finish up your PhD, even enrolling in classes, even on an O1, and you could get your O1 through an agent, and then you could work while you're doing your PhD as well. And then try to get an EB1A as quickly as possible. And then maybe you could work for IBM on your O1A, and then maybe once you have a green card, you could get a job with NASA or the Army. I don't know those organizations specifically. Do you know, Bryce, if like NASA or the Army would require researchers to have green cards? Might depend.
I don't.
Yeah,
I don't. I would say I don't know.
Okay. But take a look at some of those job ads now and see what's required, because maybe with an O1, you'd be able to accept some of that work. You have a new member. Here's somebody doing a CS PhD at Purdue, doing research in space-based data centers, who just signed up for the ACSP student package. So there you go, Bryce.
Thank you.
So the next question is, people want letters of reference for immigration petitions. Now, when we do somebody's O1 or their green card, we help them identify the top leaders in their field who can attest to their accomplishments and how they work together and what they know. And then we help draft the letter of recommendation that this person would present. So I'm going to speak on your behalf, Bryce, and I'm going to say, look, organizations want people who are actively involved, and recommenders want to have personal knowledge of somebody's contributions to be able to sign a letter. So for example, some startup founder groups that I'm in, those leaders are open to considering signing a letter of recommendation if they've personally worked with the person, if that person's been an asset and a volunteer to the organization, if they've led committees, then they would consider it. So please don't flood Bryce with a ton of requests for signing letters, especially if he doesn't know you, but think about how you could contribute. And, you know, maybe there's something at the intersection of what you're doing with space-based data centers that would be helpful for Bryce's organization to expand.
100%.
Spearhead that effort.
100%.
That would be really cool. And,
100%.
and you can do that sort of volunteer work if you're not getting paid for it. You can do that even as a student, and it's totally fine from an immigration perspective. Okay, so Stephen had asked about EB-2 NIW. I think that's an amazing path from the F1 student visa. Depending on how much time you have left in F1, regular OPT, STEM OPT, that kind of determines when and how you file for the EB-2 NIW. Like I said, with the EB-1, you might be able to file the EB-2 even before you graduate. The other really good news for students, I've been working with the government, and they just announced a couple weeks ago that having an I-140 is not a bar to getting STEM OPT. So that's a really key legal victory that we have that makes it safe for students to pursue green cards and still be able to get your OPT. Here's a question from Kartik. If you're an international founder of an established space company looking to move to the US, does it help in the immigration process if you receive investment from a US VC? Yeah, I think it does. It's absolutely not a requirement. And I know a lot of founders that are bootstrapping in various verticals right now, but look, if some big name US VC is giving you millions of dollars, we're absolutely going to use that for every possible legal advantage we can get. We can use that in an O1, in an EB1, in an EB2 NIW. So yeah, absolutely. So yeah, and just a comment to Marcelo. Yeah, it's a tough regulatory framework, which is why we were super excited to come together and share. Like, look, it's not an easy road and it's not a short road, but there's a road. And so if anything, just our goal is like, look, you can get a green card for yourself, and then you can work in space, and then you don't have to risk anything while you're waiting. You might get lucky and get a job with some organization that's willing to get you an export control license and a visa. That's great, but don't completely put your dreams on hold. There might just be a longer path to getting there, but it's possible.
And, you know, I want to point out too, Young Shen, I spoke to his counterpart, Antoine at AIAA. They're doing the Lord's work as well for students and a lot of young professionals by starting to build out a lot of roadmaps. And Marcelo, I would hook up with Young Shen about that question, because I think there's a lot of overlap between your two organizations that could really benefit each other in the future.
Awesome. Okay. Just seeing if we have maybe one more question we can answer. There's so many. So one is, what about from computer scientists and H-1Bs? Sign up for our Alcorn newsletter. We do like 2 to 3 webinars every month on different topics, and many are geared towards people in computer science. With the H-1B lottery coming up, we're also going to do a series on, like, my STEM OPT ran out, I didn't get accepted, I don't qualify for an O1, how can I stay in the United States? There's a way for employers to get 2 H-1Bs for people to have a cap exemption and be able to work without the lottery. So there are possibilities there. I mean, I love all the questions. We're at time. I will see if we can maybe synthesize some of the answers in our post-webinar email that's going to go out with the recording for everybody, and see if we can get some highlights in there. But in general, you know, everybody who's asking questions and participating, this is fabulous. And I would say that everybody who's interested in this, like, where there's a will, there's a way. You have to make a specific individual plan, but you can absolutely navigate it. And we're happy to help you and do a consultation with you. And I really appreciate everybody's comments and questions. So here's our contact information. We'll also share like links to Bryce's organization and signing up for a membership in our email. Bryce, this was so fun. Thank you for doing this.
I think we got to do a follow-up at some point, because this
we're gonna have to do a podcast
this-
next, and then maybe another webinar, and then
especially for all the non-STEM students too. And non-STEM people, that's a good one to address going, because everything in space.
Like there's so
everyone's
little
focusing on
education
STEM
for lawyers on how to immigrate. Like not everybody wants to be a space lawyer, but just like how, as an international student, aspiring lawyer, do you stay in the US? Like that's a whole thing.
Lawyers, then just comms and marketing and like just everything from that thing. So anyway, I think that's a good one next time.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much. I so appreciate it. Happy New Year. And thank you so much to everybody for listening. And thank you, Bryce,
Thank you, everyone.
Have a wonderful day, everybody.